Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Exploring Ancestral Wisdom and Healing. This is Denise King Francisco, aka Dana, and I'm here with Nicole Fix and David Cad Sturkin for what we think is going to be a really great evening of discussion. Hello, you two.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, everyone.
Well, it's that time of the year, ancestral time. October is that wonderful time where we begin to feel the thinning of the veils and we begin thinking about honoring our ancestors. And we do it in a variety of ways and have done it for a variety of ways, from All Hallows to Dia de los Muertos and Samhain, All Hallows Eve, All Saints, All Souls. Did either of you grow up with either of those holidays as a regular, or any of those holidays as a regular part of your family life?
I did not. I mean, Halloween, of course, but not any of the Day of the Dead or All Saints Day. No.
Yeah, and I did not either. I think my experience with Halloween is just the commercialized version. It's not been until I've become an adult that I've actually kind of really started to understand what the Samhain and what Halloween is about. And so, growing up, it was about dressing up and going trick-or-treating.
Getting a bucket load or a pillowcase load of candy.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, in my household, in a very Catholic household, we celebrated Halloween in the way that we think of Halloween here in the West. And we also celebrated All Souls and All Saints Day.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was part of the Catholic tradition in the house. But I really didn't know the depth of it, and I didn't know about the Day of the Dead until Lily Cosme's mom, Delphina, came to the school to teach an entire day-long, workshop about that. And I never even entertained a thought about Samhain until I met Amantha Murphy. Cad, do you remember last year when we were in Ireland, Amantha telling us that Ireland is actually the birthplace of Halloween?
Yeah, she talked about Samhain, and that actually it was when the Irish people came over to the Americas that they brought a lot of that folklore and tradition here with them, and that's kind of how actually really Halloween kind of started in this country, which I was really fascinated with. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One of the things that I learned recently, and the reason that I learned it is because I've been watching, I did watch A Discovery of Witches, but I'm reading the trilogy, the last of the books.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand until beginning to read those books that the reason for the jack-o'-lanterns isn't just because it's fun to carve pumpkins and make them look really cool, but because they were actually lit as a means of warding off negative spirits.
Yeah. And it was interesting because I actually, some of the reading that I did talked about that was a tradition that was brought over from Ireland, where they previously used to carve faces into beets and turnips. They wouldn't put the candle in. because they couldn't put a candle in the turnip or the beets, but it was used for the same reason. It keeps the spirits away. But when they got to the Americas, pumpkin became a great thing for them to be able to use.
It's fascinating. So, Nicole, for you in your household, will our lovely little Sophia go out trick-or-treating?
She will, yes.
And what is her understanding of trick-or-treating?
Wow, great question. And this really makes me think of the importance of like talking to her about the history, right? In a way that I certainly didn't get growing up, but talking about, and connecting it to the Day of the Dead and to All Saints Day as well. And just, I don't know, the symbolism of the ancestral symbolism, but also like, how it's believed that the veil is thinner at that time, right? That it's easier to communicate with loved ones who've crossed over, and the beauty and the joy in that, rather than like this fear and this terror that can be associated with it in terms of Halloween.
Absolutely. Cad, that brings up something when all of us have had a lot of discussions about ancestry and our relatives and the difference between worshiping our relatives and honoring our relatives. And for me, all of these upcoming holy days, including the ones dedicated to the saints, for me are about reverence. They're about honoring rather than worship. What is the difference to you?
It's interesting you bring up that question. I was going to ask you the same thing. So to me, honoring my ancestors is honoring the journey that they actually took to bring me into the place where I am. The generations and generations, the famines that they went through, the hardships they went through, the good things that they went through. But it's honoring the journey that they had. So to me, it's more about that honoring. It's about honoring them for the people that they were and for how who they are became part of my bones and my blood. And so to me, that's different than worshiping.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Nicole, same question for you. What's the difference to you or for you between worship and honoring or reverence of any sort?
Yeah, and I love that you use the word honor, because I think that has gotten lost a lot in our culture. And honoring is, considering like Kat said, just the what they've sacrificed for us, right? And with the wisdom that they've gained and shared through their lifetimes from one generation to the next. So honoring that wisdom rather than like revering, something that, I don't know, might not be as in the words you use, the holiness of it. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It takes away. It makes it like this, I don't know, hierarchical piece that takes away from the power of what we have as individuals. Like we're going to be the ancestors someday for our offspring and our loved ones, and that we're all equally wise and important as life unfolds.
I like that. For me, growing up Catholic, we were often accused of worshiping Mary or worshiping the idols in the church, the beautiful statuary and such, and worshiping the beads, the rosary, and worshiping and worshiping and worshiping. And, as a young girl, I was taught, Dee, we don't worship those statues. They're statues, but we honor what they represent.
Yes, right.
There's a difference for me in that way, honoring what they represent. And for me, my ancestors represent so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so for me, that's the difference. Lily is in the chat room. Our wonderful Lily is in there with Lady Hawk. And Lily is saying, I would have to say that I had the kids' Halloween tradition of trick or treating, etc., and of course the Catholic tradition of All Souls and Saints' Day. But it wasn't until I was an adult that my family started celebrating the Day of the Dead tradition. So I always say that October 31st is honoring my inner child and then moving into the family traditions. Because November 1st and 2nd are, the celebration of the Day of the Dead.
I like that. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I like that too.
Absolutely.
The year that her mother, Delphina, was here and she taught was the year that Todd and I created for the first time an ancestral altar to honor our relatives. And it really felt so beautiful and potent and very holy.
Yeah.
Because we designated a part of the family room here on the main floor of the house with a beautiful tablecloth and some photos and some beautiful candles and bits and pieces of ancestral art and things of that nature, spiritual pieces, the rosaries for me, etc. And it felt so sacred and so wonderful. And I felt that in some way I was actually honoring the connection within myself to all of them. So I felt as though for me there was also a gift in it for myself because it was honoring them and they are connected to me. Does that make sense, Nicole?
Yes. And I'm just thinking it, and maybe it's something that Lily said too, but about the inner child, how so often we can disconnect from ourselves, our relatives, but how that's all within us. And so being able to honor the wisdom that's innate into who we are, but how that comes from those before us in our DNA. It's really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the interesting thing too is that it's interesting how Halloween has somewhat evolved into this dark, menacing holiday for many. Attached to some people believe it's attached to Satan and to the wicked things and things like that. When actually it's, as you said, Denise, I really like the fact that it's a holy day.
Mm-hmm.
It's a day at which we do honor those who came before us and what they the impact that they had on our lives. I mean, I think it's just interesting how it evolved into something frightening and scary, and I wonder if some of that is related to just the Western culture's fear of death, and fear of because to me Halloween is a lot about death and life and death, because it actually in the ancient times it was when they celebrated it was about the end of summer, the end of the light, and the beginning of the dark, going into the darker months of the year. And so it was kind of that light and darkness. So it's just, I think it's something that's really interesting how it's evolved. But I do think, though, more people are starting to honor it as a sacred holiday.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, isn't it true that Halloween is more popular and more widely celebrated than Christmas in this country?
and more adults are celebrating it. It just used to be a children's thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's amazing what happens when Hollywood takes over, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think too, and maybe it's that idea of moving into the dark, and the darker months, and oftentimes we associate the darkness with evil and bad, when actually those darker months is our ability to go inward and to maybe look at our shadow, or even just to look at those aspects of ourselves that that we would like to maybe bring some change to. So it's, I actually really enjoy this time of year, because it does draw me inward.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me really consider where it is I want to be and what I want to be doing, and so yeah, I absolutely love this time of year.
Me too. I love the darker, the longer nights, and the introspection, like you said, that can come with it. And like what you're bringing up, the symbolism and the death kind of rebirth process of, that there's so much that can be learned. If we're able to sit and be present with it and not have it be so fear-based,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is so much of what Halloween has become about, is so horror. It's horror, right? So,
right.
And that there might not be so much to be fearful of.
Mm-hmm.
So
it seems to be a lot about the ugly.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting to me how how witches evolved into these creatures with warts, eating children, and all of that. And again, as you said, Dana, a lot of it is Hollywood driven.
Exactly.
But I do think as well, it was interesting. I think that probably the Puritans probably had some influence on how Halloween. They probably saw it as a dark, menacing force. That's when the witch trials were going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so they associated it oftentimes with those bad things. It was interesting too. Another place I was reading talked about that during the Civil War. Part of the scariness of Halloween. During the Civil War, there was a lot of unclaimed bodies on the battlefields, or men that had gotten back, and there was a lot of stories that people would tell about these ghosts coming back from the dead. These warriors as ghosts, which I thought was, again, it's kind of feeding into that fear.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's interesting how it can be painted by a culture.
Mm-hmm. And going back to the big noses and the broken, sort of facial features, that was actually a torture that was used to break somebody who was accused of witchcraft. Their nose might have been broken.
Yep.
Their face all scarred up via various, dreadful ways. And so what we have, what looks like, I think of Sea Haggy, from Popeye, that, or Broomhilda, or Hazel the Witch, that's another one, is actually something of a comic of what actually did happen, mostly to the women who were accused back in the day. And doing my ancestry, it looks as though I have one of those women in my ancestry who was hung by the neck in Connecticut in 1643. And, part of the beauty, I believe, that was lost about celebrating the ancestors at this time of the year is that it was really nothing more than going with the flow of the seasons of life, the seasons of Grandmother Earth, of the time of harvest, the time of going within, and the time of the year when the veil is very thin. And most of the reason it's a whole lot thinner really is because the nights are longer.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Nicole.
Well, I'm just thinking of how, that easily, with the veil being thinner, the night being, more dominant, is how easy that creates fear and can stir fear in us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but I would love to see a shift start to come in this, like, seeing the beauty and And, just even this ancestral work that we're talking about, right? Of like, it's not something to fear, it's something to honor and hold sacred space for, because so much of our ancestry brings us to who we are now as people. So there's power in that.
The other evening, I was teaching the class, Walking with the Ancestors, and a fantastic question came up. And the question came from a lovely woman who wanted to know, so how do we get over the fear of learning about our ancestral spirituality pre-Common Era religion? How do we get over the fear of that? Because there can be a hurdle, and I think we're talking about it tonight, because when we talk about things such as this, it takes away the veil or the mist, the shroud of fear, of Hollywood, of what someone one time said. And to go back to a very practical stance, that there was a time when all of our relatives lived within their tribes and their clans, and their life was dictated by the position of the stars, of the seasons, etc. And I subscribe to the Farmer's Almanac. And every time I look at it, I think of this very thing. Going back to everybody's tribalism at one point brings us back to a time when our people knew. Hey, Del Marie. Lily is saying that she knew even as a kid that this time of the year was special. She didn't know the spiritual meaning behind it until she was older, but she could feel how special this time of the year is. And I think that a lot of us can feel that. Years ago, I had a little girl come trick-or-treating at my house. And you both remember my little Yorkie Merlin. And every year I would dress Merlin up. And this particular year I dressed him up as Pepe Le Pew. And I put him on the island in the center of the kitchen where when I opened the door, all the kids could see Pepe Le Pew. And every year he was something different. There was a little girl, maybe 3-4 years old, dressed up as a witch. And her parents stood on the sidewalk and she walked right up and into my home. And she looked at me and she said, "You can see them too, can't you?" And I looked at her and I said, "You mean the other kids dressed up in their costumes?" She said, "No, you know what I mean. You can see them too." And I looked at her and I said, "And have you always seen them?" And she said, "For as long as I've known." And I looked at her and I said, "Well, then you have a very special gift." "Oh," she said, "and your dog is cute." And then she said, "Now can I have candy?" And I said, "You can have 2 candies." And her parents were kind of looking at me askance. But I'll never forget that day. And it began this process in my mind of exactly what Lily is talking about. All of the little ones that are out there trick-or-treating or having their festivity, and yet they know something more is happening. The sensitive children. Does that make sense, Nicole?
Yeah, yes. And I think they long for that too, right? Because they have more memory of it, of, the afterlife or the other side than we do. Frequently said that children and animals are the most psychic, right? And just to be able to have a time to be more connected to that, it's valuable.
And I do think, if I remember correctly, originally the idea of dressing up as someone other than who you are, oftentimes was so the spirits that crossed the veil that maybe weren't as friendly would not recognize you, and then would not do harm. And so as you said, a lot of these traditions that we've have been established through the years were really meant in relationship to how we interact with our ancestors during that time.
Mm-hmm.
I think I sent both of you that recipe, something I found online that was called soul cakes.
I love the idea of soul cakes.
That is very cool.
And originally, that was, I think it was from Britain, when people would dress up in some way, but they would go to a home, and actually priests encouraged this. And someone would give them a cake with raisins and other things in it, and then they would pray for a member of that household that they believed was in purgatory. So it was, they were praying for the soul of that person, which I thought was a very, and that probably is kind of how we got the whole idea of reading. It evolves, to candy and things now, but kind of that whole idea of going to someone's home and having an interaction with them. So I found that, wow.
I love that idea, Tad.
Yeah.
It's also fascinating, and I think one of the greatest things that we can do for ourselves, honestly, is to educate ourselves. Today you suggested that book about mysticism in America.
Yeah.
And I couldn't stand it, so I finally downloaded it onto my iPhone. And I started reading about Marie Laveau and Creole people in New Orleans in the early 1800s, and about voodoo and voodoo and those religions that there's a lot of misunderstanding about for a lot of reasons. And one of the things that struck me was this idea in the African tradition of lemba, which we in the Catholic tradition would call limbo, and it being a place of the crossroads, and lemba being the god of the crossroads. And so what we find out when we go back far enough is just how much of our modern day version of any religion carries the tribal aspect. And what I mean by that is, just as you both have said, our connection to earth, to sky, to those places in between, and our connection to the creator of all things.
Yeah.
And for some people, that's kind of scary.
Well, and you think about it, I mean, before Christianity, pretty much the religions were earth-based.
Yes.
Oh, and so it was, their gods or goddesses were based on things that they were seeing in nature. Think about Thor and the thunder. It was based on their experiences in nature, and that's how they experienced the world. And to me, their spirituality was more of something that they lived every day versus it being something that they had their holidays and things that they celebrated. But I think it felt to me more like when you were living in an earth agricultural culture, that your experience with gods or goddesses or however you interpreted that was much more of a daily practice of living versus I have this day, I go to church, so I don't know, it felt to me more like when Christianity came in and started to change things, it tried to take some of those things away from people.
Mm-hmm. And it did.
Absolutely, yeah. In fact, it was interesting because All Souls Day, one of those days, actually originally was on May 13th. It was called the Maria Day. And they had such a difficult time. The church was trying to take the tradition of Samhain away, and they had such a hard time getting people to change that they just changed it back from May 13th back to November 1st.
Yeah.
I thought was very.
And Nicole, I love this because, well, for me growing up, All Souls Day, November 1st, was a time when you said extra prayers, particularly at that Sunday Mass, extra prayers for your dearly departed ancestors and those that you love. And All Saints Day was a day dedicated to praying for the saints or, asking for assistance from the saints. And Sophia goes to All Saints Academy.
Yeah, I know. I love it because, she gets to learn about that from such a young age where I was not raised Catholic and she's being raised Catholic. But that's one of the things I love about Catholicism is that they do incorporate the saints and the souls and the loved ones who've crossed over, and to be able to learn it at just, at such a young age.
Right. Exactly. Oh, Del Marie is in the house. And she's saying while she was in New Mexico, she learned about the Day of the Dead and the burning of Zozobra. I don't know what that is, Del. Maybe you could fill us in on what that is. Catherine, what are your traditions down there in Texas, in the Lone Star State? Anything going on special there? I've never been to the French Quarter in New Orleans. Have either of you?
I have not but I hear it's quite the thing.
Yeah, I have not either. I would love to. It's on my bucket list.
Okay. Maybe there will be like a group visit,
That would be fun. Yeah.
Well, and I think that part of, with respect to why it is that some people are afraid of these particular holy days is because it involves so much spirit and things that go on behind the veil. And perhaps, I think that reverence for our loved ones is in a category of its own, but sometimes it gets lumped into every other thing that goes on with work in the realm of spirit. And so for me, setting aside a time of reverence for those we love who are ancestral, for me, is something very different than having a Ouija board or having a seance or conjuring up any sort of a thing. But it really has become lumped in a lot of ways. I mean, how do you feel about that, Nicole? You're a psychologist, so you must hear about these things.
Well, I'm just thinking about how, so much of it is taking our power back. You know what I mean? Rather than giving it away. Giving it away to, and that's the whole point of mysticism in many ways, too, right? Is that we have within us and within our ancestry, a lot of power that can be frightening and scary. It's easier to give it away, so and thinking that people are wanting to take that back too, taking our power back, and I don't know, so that's kind of what I think of, in some of this that we're talking about.
I love that, taking our power back, and particularly our ancestral.
Yes, and that's, just to add to that, there's so much wisdom that is in each one of us, as we go through this turbulent time of the world, right? That as this ancestry within us is waking up, it is the wisdom of the tens of hundreds of years that's in our very DNA, and the 7.7 billion piece puzzle we're part of on this earth that is needed right now to help this, to withstand what we're going through right now. It's pretty incredible.
It's very incredible, and I couldn't agree with you more. Cad, in your work with shamanism, you understand exactly what Nicole just said about everything being interconnected. And so we talk about with All Hallows and all of the holidays of being mindful of good spirits rather than the wily spirits. Yeah. And it is a holy time. It is a sacred time. And a lot of people get hung up on what could potentially go wrong, what could happen. I'm not going to go there and open up that door, I hear a lot of people say. But there's so much beauty on the other side as well, and I'm not diminishing this fact that spirit is potent on both sides of that coin.
Yeah.
But how do you suggest to people that perhaps in spending time honoring their ancestors, that there is that can be a very separate thing than all of the other items we've been talking about with horror movies and all of that kind of a thing?
Yeah. So, I think of it, I guess, in some ways about where you hold your intention. Are you holding your intention on the evil, the bad, the fearful things? Or are you holding your intention on the good things that your ancestors experienced in order to get you to the place of to where you are? Of course, we all went through hardship. I think hardship versus evil and bad. I don't think. I mean, hardship to me is just part of living. It doesn't have to be bad or evil. So to me, it's where do you place your intention? For All Hallows Eve this year, I'm being very intentional about what I'm doing. I have started to create an altar. I've started to find some pictures of my ancestors that I want to be on that altar. Being very intentional about, again, thinking about what it is they sacrificed, what it is they did for me so that I could be here and experience this life. And yes, again, recognizing that they had hardship, but not focusing on all the negativity. And again, I think Hollywood has really created a lot of despair around this holiday, which can actually be a really beautiful holiday if we allow it to be.
Yeah. One of the things that, thank you for sharing that first and foremost, Kat, but as you were talking about creating your altars, a thought that occurred to me was that, many people already have a family altar in their home and they don't recognize it, such as photos on the mantle. A lot of people will dedicate their entire fireplace mantle to photos of their relatives. Or they might have the photo wall, where photographs of all of the relatives are on that wall, or in their book cabinet. And so they've already got places set aside for photos of the relatives. Now, when I went to Georgia for the very first time to meet my relatives, my biological relatives, I went into my Aunt Dot's house, which was very much decorated like my house here in Lowell. But she had what she called the family room. She had an entire room with beautiful bookshelves and lovely pieces of furniture that were nothing but photos of relatives who had passed.
Interesting.
And I thought to myself, well, this is one of the most beautiful altars to the ancestors I've ever seen in my life. And I never, expressed it that way, but it included, the family crest and the coat of arms, and all of it was in this room. So I think people already do it in a lot of cases, but they don't really know why. And so what I'm saying is, for those of you that do have the photo mantle, maybe you have all of the photos on top of your piano, maybe during October 31st, November 1st, November 2nd, you spend maybe just a little more time with a little more reverence with those photos. Maybe you just take the photos and you dust them off and you polish them up.
Yep.
That could be a form of also having reverence for and honoring the ancestors. How do you both feel about that?
I agree. And Dana, I think did I send this information to you? There was something that I read recently that talked about if you're going to have an ancestral altar, it's important that you don't have live people on that altar.
Yes, you did.
Photos that you have on your ancestral altar are people that have passed on, and that it doesn't include people that are living now. And I'm trying to remember what the rationale was behind it, because some of us have pictures of that we like of, maybe mom with some of us that are living yet. But this article or the piece encouraged you not to have pictures of live people on your ancestral altar.
Yeah. And the reason for that is the thought in many spiritual circles when it comes to these 3 particular holidays in a row is that the living don't belong amongst the dead.
That makes sense. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I couldn't remember exactly what it was. Yeah.
Because we're honoring those that have passed on, and so we probably wouldn't want to have a photograph. Like if I have my ancestral altar, which Todd and I will, I will place photos of those that have passed on, but I'm not going to place a photo of my sister Del Marie on there because she's still very much alive and still, raising hell on this side of the veil. So, so let's talk a minute about this idea. What about those that are listening right now that grew up in foster homes or adoptive families? How do they honor the ancestors? What are your thoughts about that, Nicole?
That's a great question. I guess for me, that it's back. Kat was saying this earlier, but the intention. Like, what is the intention with honoring the ancestors? Is it for appreciation or wisdom or compassion or love or whatever? Like, there can be an intention that's placed on that and meaning through, symbolic items or, or even a drawing that you could do, or it's something.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm.
Or even just lighting a candle. Someone who may not know any of their biological ancestors, but yet know that they live in their bones, their blood. Just, as you said, being intentional about, I'm going to purchase this candle, and this is going to honor my ancestors, or putting a flower on the altar and saying, this is an honor of you. I don't know who you are, but thank you for what you went through to bring me to this place. I think that's a great question, Denise, because, for many people who maybe don't know ancestors, how do you do that honoring? And I think you still can honor. I think it's really good to honor, even if you don't know them by face or So yeah.
Well, every year when Todd and I create our special table downstairs, I have a photograph now of my biological mother, my biological father, my grandparents, and also my adoptive dad, the Sarge. He's right there, still large and in charge, on my ancestral table. And we light a candle, and the way that I honor them is that I give gratitude. Every time I walk by that table, I say thank you. Thank you. And that's all that really needs to be said is thank you.
Yes. Yes.
And
I see you.
I see you, yes.
Acknowledgement. Yeah.
Exactly. And Todd has photographs of his family on there as well. Lily is also saying that the idea that the living don't belong amongst the dead is also true for the Day of the Dead tradition as well.
Yeah. No, it's important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Dana, what are your thoughts about feeding the ancestors?
Well, in some traditions, the ancestors are fed. And by, it depends on what kind of ceremony I'm doing, but for some ceremonies we feed the ancestors. We leave a little bit of food, as you know.
Yep.
And in some traditions, there are, the way that Delphina Cosme taught us, sometimes we put their favorite beverage, or maybe if they smoke cigarettes or smoke cigars, we might put one of those on the table in honor of them, some fresh flowers. I always include fresh flowers. on the altar. And in some traditions, such as voodoo and some of the various forms of voodoo, they do feed, regularly. No different than in a lot of ways in ancient Egypt, the way that the high priest and priestesses every day nourished and cleansed and anointed with unguents and oils, and also incense in the various temples in Egypt. And so we see that even today, those of us that are Catholic, you walk into a Catholic church, that we have feast days, we have celebrations of the dead all the time, because every day is some saint's birthday or a feast day of some saint, who not all of them inhabited a physical body, by the way. And so we can feed them with songs, we can feed them with food. On my ancestral altar, for example, I always have rose water. I have water, and I always have rose water in honor of them.
Do you keep your ancestral altar up all year round?
Yes.
Or just you? Okay.
Well, my ancestral altar is up and all the time, 24/7, but it is different than what we're talking about with regard to the holy days. On this altar that's here in the space that I'm talking to you from, there are no photographs.
Okay. Yeah.
Where do you get the rose water?
Well, you can get those at Harvest Health.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, rose water, because I don't always have rose petals available. I have the rose petals up in the school, the dried rose petals from the garden. So I decided to do something that I actually learned from the traditions of the Pennsylvania Deutsch. Thank you, William Penn, for bringing in our wonderful mystical relatives from Deutschlands in Europe. And that is the use of rose water. Number one, the energy of roses is so uplifting. Just about in any, well, we call them the Marian altar in a Catholic church, not only are there rows and rows of candles to light and asking for her intercession, but oftentimes there are vases of roses. And people will say that they smell roses when Mary is about, and that is such an elevating scent. One of the things that's fascinating for me about the 3 days we're talking about, because she's also considered a saint, so some people will say that on All Saints' Day they'll get a whiff of roses, and they know that Saint Mary is near them. And so I say to people, if you're going to, spend a little extra time this All Hallows or Samhain, All Souls, really in honoring your ancestors, don't be surprised if you smell Grandpa's favorite pipe tobacco or smell Grandma's Emerald perfume, right? All of those things can happen because we never do anything in a vacuum. If we're spending time and energy honoring those that came before us, they are aware of that, and oftentimes they will reach through to also send you notes of love. That does happen.
Absolutely. One of the other things, one of the other traditions as well is on Samhain is to, or actually on any of the days, is to set a place of table for for your ancestor, and then to offer that plate out in nature to the spirits.
Mm-hmm. Del Marie is talking about that in the chat room. Lakota tradition is we put out food for our ancestors before we eat at every meal. It's not practiced too much anymore, she's saying. And Lily is adding, we include on our altar even our furry pets who have passed.
I was going to say, absolutely, yeah. I mean, they're part of our family. They should as much be part of any altar that we have. Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hope this evening we've given folks, maybe another perspective about Samhain and All Hallows and All Souls and All Saints. And an understanding that it was never meant to be scary. It was very much practiced in a time when we simply knew that we were part of nature and the movements of the seasons and the planets and the stars. We simply knew that it was innate in us. And we've drifted so far afield of that. And many people are longing once again for that feeling, that connection with something more than self with a lower S, something bigger than that, that also includes living things that have passed on, such as our furry animals, and Grandmother Earth and Father Sky. So I would say to people who are listening, if you have a fear of what we're talking about, you can always call and schedule an appointment with our wonderful Nicole Fix. She is a licensed therapist. She does take insurance, and that's a practicality of being human. Sometimes we need to talk to somebody about something in order to move on. If that's not a concern for you, taking a moment to delve into the tradition of Samhain or All Hallows, autumn, as it pertains to your ancestors, I think is a wonderful way to begin. What advice would you give people, Nicole?
I really love the symbolism in these getting into the natural rhythms of life, of nature, of this time of year where the dark becomes more present. Maybe we need that spiritual connection more as we're introspective, that ancestral wisdom more. So getting and connected to the rhythms that, like you said, people are longing to get back to that place where we once lived. Especially in that indigenous cultures still do live that way. So,
do you think that it's something that we can take out of the past and bring it effectively into the modern day, Nicole?
I do. And I think there's so much symbolism to be had, like in terms of like the seasons and what the symbolism that's in Samhain and Halloween and All Saints Day and Day of the Dead, just of for our own selves, but then for collectively as well. And it's reassuring too to know that this time of year it's going to be a bit darker, but I'm going to be more connected to spirit, and I'm going to go within and be more introspective. But it's not going to be forever, and so there's reassurance and sitting with that natural rhythm. So, I do think if we can get back into that state of being, that people will feel more connected with themselves, with their souls, with their loved ones, ancestors, all of that.
I love that. And it's so beautiful that you can hand this down to Sophia, just as I have, with my kids and now my grandson, to keep those traditions alive, not like they were done perhaps, 7,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago or 1,000 years ago, but knowing that information and bringing it forward into a practice that we can explore and appreciate today. Same questions to you. What do you say to people about how to effectively bring that information and place it in today? Or how do you get over the fear of it before you can even do that?
Well, so I think personally, one of the reasons that I became involved in being a death doula or a death midwife is trying to take the fear out of death and also making it be more of a experience in which we, again, are honoring those people that are passing on from our lives and are now becoming our ancestors. There was a video that was sent to me by a lady who led our death midwife class. It's just this incredible video that I love this time of year especially. It's a music video, but it's these folks going out into a cemetery and singing and dancing on the graves, and talking about honoring the relationships and people that are from around there start to come in, and so to me, it's about taking the fearfulness away, the fearfulness of death, and again acknowledging the people who are part of my blood and my bones, and just being very. It's a time of being very grateful. So.
I like that.
Yeah.
I have all of my table supplies set aside. It's really become a little bit more ornate every year, thanks to Delphina and her teaching. Because even when I set the table, the special space for honoring the ancestors, I do it in a good way. And I'm very mindful of what I'm doing when I place the table in that position and I put the beautiful cloth on it. And I really do put myself into something of a meditative space.
Yes.
And I will have nice music playing in my home. And I make it an event for myself. And then Todd will place what he wants to have placed in a way of reverence for those in his ancestry. I place pieces for myself. And Merlin's painting, thank you, Claudia Nielsen. The beautiful painting she did of Merlin is always right above the table, so he's always included. And it really has, I have to say, it's given the entire season, for me, a much more beautiful reality of it. It doesn't require me to do anything other than create a special place within my home to honor those that have come before me. Yeah. So if you're listening, it can be as unique as you want it to be. Please try to remember that the living don't belong amongst the dead for those 3 days. But have fun with it.
I like the fact that you said you're making an event.
Mm-hmm.
Make it very intentional.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really what this time of the year is about, is being very intentional. Intentional in relationship to my ancestors, but also intentional about me going inward to know what I need.
Mm-hmm.
It's just I really like that thought of making it a very intentional event when I'm creating a space like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and engaging all the senses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for those of you that, if you don't have a big space, and maybe you share a living space with another person, maybe you can have a treasure box that you can slide under the bed or back into the closet and just take it out during the time when you want to celebrate. So again, make it as unique as you wish to, based on where you live and what your living situation is. And also, one other thing that I wanted to add before we cast off for this evening is also remember that while we are reaching out to our ancestors begin reaching out to us in our dreams, in our meditations, in synchronicities, in wonderful signs and wonders. And all that's required from any of us is a thank you. I see you. I feel you. And more than anything, have fun with it. It doesn't need to be pious and too serious. Have fun. Have joy.
Yes.
All right. With that, everybody, we are at the top of the hour. Thank you for joining us once again with this podcast. We appreciate each and every one of you that tunes in, wherever you happen to be around Grandmother Earth. Tracy Civic is saying soapandsuchalpina.com. Soapandsuchalpina.com is someone that Tracy knows that makes the rose water by hand. She distills it by hand. It's organic, and I'm guessing she must do it in a very good and sacred way. So Soap and Such Alpena. How do you spell Alpena? It's one of those Michigan towns. Alpena. Soapandsuchalpena.com. With that, everybody have a beautiful night and blessings of all Hallows, Samhain, Dia de los Muertos, All Souls, and All Saints. Blessings be. Good night, you two.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.